Welcome everyone to our presentation on the Western New York Clean Production Leaders, a lean chemical management program for local businesses leading the way to cleaner air and waterways. Generous support from the Environmental Protection Agency, awarded in the summer of 2019, enabled the Western New York Sustainable Business Roundtable to bring the best in class together to create a program with tangible chemical reduction tools and solutions for SBR members and the wider Western New York community. We are bringing the resources together so the companies get a complete support package free of charge that's both unique and powerful. The program runs until spring of 2022. As an introduction to our program today, I will be introducing a little bit more about the background of the Western New York Sustainable Business Roundtable, and then introducing you to today's speakers. Our speakers will be discussing their business as a participating partner in our program, and then we will be transitioning to a question and answer format and then closing. So the Western New York Sustainable Business Roundtable was officially created in 2014 to help companies invest in their economic and environmental futures by connecting organizations and resources, educating businesses and communities, so that we can together learn best practices for sustainability and recognizing their achievements with the goal of creating an economically and environmentally resilient Western New York. Our SBR currently has 72 dues-paying members. The most recent addition to our sustainable business community are Rigidized Metal Corporations and Cooper Signs. Please consider joining SBR if your organization has a presence in Western New York. The Western New York Sustainable Business Roundtable is able to tap into this extensive member network to educate businesses in Western New York regarding chemical footprinting, what that means, and how to achieve that. We also are able to tap into our network of businesses to recruit businesses to participate in this program. SBR currently has tools and resources for sustainable planning open to all, available under the What We Do tab on our website. So if you're interested in learning a bit more about SBR, how to develop a sustainable business plan, please visit our website and that What We Do tab. We also have a tools for member only section, which delves a little bit deeper into connections with other local sustainable businesses and technical tools and resources, including our annual metrics reporting tool. So with that, I will introduce our presenters. Today, we'll be hearing from 3 of our participating businesses. Sherry Peel, who is the program manager of the Chemical Footprint Project at the Clean Production Action. Tiffany Bartz is an EHS engineer at TapeCon, and Robert Johnson is partner and head maltster at Niagara Malt. Thank you, all 3 of you, for joining us today. But first, I just wanted to touch on our project partners. So we have participating businesses through this program, but we also had project partners who were essential to the success of this program. The Clean Production Action, which you'll be hearing a lot more about from Sherry in a moment, they were our program's tool providers. They design and deliver strategic solutions for green chemicals, sustainable materials, and environmentally preferable products. We also had partnered with New York State Pollution Prevention Institute, who are our problem solvers. Their team of engineers and sustainability specialists have firsthand experience of the challenges facing organizations like businesses, municipalities, and communities who want to become more sustainable. Lastly, we partnered with CORE and Niagara Share, who are the science-based solution providers. So we want to extend a huge appreciation to them and all their work that they did on our project. With that, I will hand it over to Sherry, who will discuss a little bit more about the Clean Production Action and their involvement with our project. Over to you, Sherry.
Next slide.
Oh, sorry. That one? Or you want to go back?
There we go. Yes. Okay, great. Thanks. So Clean Protection Action, excuse me, is a nonprofit. We're based just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, in Somerville. And we design and develop tools for sustainable solutions at the chemical level, the material level, and the product level. We do this through 4 programs, 2 of which are tools and 2 of which are collaborations. So working from left to right here, quickly, our 4 programs. First, our 2 collaborations. The first is BizNGO, which is the business and NGO network for sustainable chemicals and materials. This is an organization that brings together businesses that are downstream users of chemicals, so anybody in the supply chain except for chemical manufacturers, going all the way to consumers of products, so large-scale healthcare systems, for example, and then businesses across sectors. They get together with environmental NGOs with the goal of talking about making products inherently safer and using less hazardous chemicals. How do we do that? The next collaboration is the Investor Environmental Health Network. So these are investors that are focused on ESG, so environment, governance, and sustainability. And in particular, IEHN focuses on the use of safer chemicals by the companies that they hold. So those are our 2 collaborations. Our 2 tools, I'm actually going to go all the way here to the right. Green Screen for Safer Chemicals is our, it's a methodology to assess chemicals of high concern or the inherent hazard of chemicals. It's actually based on EPA's Design for Environment criteria that were developed some 15 years ago. And it allows the benchmarking of chemicals by inherent hazard. So it's a Green Screen 1. It would be, benchmark 1 would be the most hazardous chemicals, goes all the way to benchmark 4, which is the most preferred chemicals. And looks at that across 18 different endpoints. So carcinogenicity, mutagenicity, reproductive toxicity, etc. And then finally, what I'm going to talk about more today is the Chemical Footprint Project. So here we take, we build on the framework of Green Screen, and we look at chemicals in products at an organizational level. So if you are a company that's using products, what we are focused on is how do you set up management systems that allow you to reduce the use of hazardous chemicals, and then what is your metric for measuring your progress forward. Next slide. So our 2 metrics that we've developed within the Chemical Footprint Project, I may also refer to that as CFP, is first the chemical footprint. So that is the amount of chemicals of high concern. So here we've defined that as, again, with Green Screen, it's a Green Screen benchmark 1 chemical across some scope. So it's products, packaging, manufacturing process chemicals, facilities, and supply chain. And with this project, what we've done is move into a different part of that scope. So for the first 5 years, we're in our 6th year right now, we had really focused on products and to some extent packaging. We ran a pilot last year on manufacturing process chemicals, and what this project with the Sustainable Business Roundtable really looked at was facility chemicals. So I'm going to talk more about what exactly chemical footprint is in a moment, but then there's also our other tool is the Chemical Footprint Project Survey, and that is a list of questions that companies answer that looks at business management practices. And it's actually through BizNGO, that collaboration, we have over 15 years worked with leaders across sectors to define best management practices that will enable a company to reduce its use of chemicals of high concern. So the CFP survey has companies go through and look at their own chemicals management systems and then compares them to best practices, and you get a score of 1 to 100 on where you're at with regard to best practice. Next slide. So again, the CFP survey is designed for brands, manufacturers, and retailers. With this project, we ended up working more with users of chemicals. So we expanded our scope a bit of who was using the survey, and with that, ended up changing the survey questions a bit, moving from questions about products that companies were producing or selling to looking at their facilities and the products, the chemicals in the products that they were using to maintain their facilities. Next slide. You can click through these. Yeah. So again, the survey is divided into 4 pillars. You see here the distribution of the points. There's actually a typo there. It should be 20 points for management strategy. The 2 middle parts, developing your chemical inventory and being able to measure your chemical footprint, are worth a total of 60. And then finally, disclosure and verification is worth 20 points. Next slide. Yeah, that's just showing climbing up the mountain. Well, keep going. All right. So in terms of organizations that we have affiliated with CFP, we've got the companies that are filling out the CFP survey, but then we also have CFP signatories. So these are the organizations that are interested in the results of the CFP survey. So these are investors, healthcare, governments, NGOs, and retailers. And you see some of them listed there. So it's investors with assets of over 2.7 trillion in assets under management, and then also organizations including healthcare systems and retailers with over 700 billion in purchasing power are interested in companies going through the survey and then disclosing their results and then what those results are so that they can guide their purchasing or their investment decisions. Next slide. We're in our 6th year right now, but here are a list of here's a list of the companies that have participated in the first 5 years. Just to give you an idea, we've got everybody from very small companies to Fortune 500. Next slide. So this is another one of those where you can click through. There we go. So this is showing you again the 4 parts, the 4 pillars of the CFP survey. So again, the part that our tool that's looking at best management practices for companies. So we start with management strategy. So those are 4 questions that are asking about your chemical policy and how it's integrated into your management system. The next 2 pillars are, you can think of them as having brackets around them. The first is, how much do you know about your chemical inventory? How big is your restricted substances list or your manufacturing restricted substances list? So what do you know about what's not in your chemical inventory? And then what do you know about that is in your chemical inventory? Are you asking your suppliers for full chemical ingredient information? And if you are, how much of that are you actually getting from your suppliers? Because what we've seen is that it takes a number of years to get full chemical ingredient information. And even then you need to keep re-educating your suppliers about that. So then moving into the next pillar, with that chemical inventory, you move into footprint measurement. So you go through and you assess your chemical inventory. Which of those chemicals are inherently hazardous? And then for those inherently hazardous chemicals, have you set goals to reduce them? Have you measured your footprint? Are you able to measure your footprint? And to what degree can you measure your footprint? Can you do it by your count of chemicals of high concern, or can you do it by mass? And then have you taken steps to reduce your chemical footprint? And can you measure that? Are you also consciously moving towards safer, inherently safer chemicals, because if you just take out the chemicals of high concern, you may end up with a regrettable substitute unless you are actively pursuing safer alternatives. So those two middle pillars there, we have for most of the history of the CFP project, or of the CFP survey rather, those are focused on products. For this project, we ended up focusing on facilities. The last pillar there is disclosure and verification. That again, we have a question about for products, how much of the chemical inventory in your products are you disclosing to the next folks down the line in your supply chain, whether it's a consumer or whoever your customers are. And then a couple of questions about will you disclose the results of your survey publicly, and have you had it third-party verified? Next slide. So then I'm just going to run through quickly this concept of a chemical footprint in a little bit more detail. So a chemical footprint is, at its highest level, chemical footprint of an organization would be the total mass of chemicals of high concern, which again are benchmark 1 chemicals within the green screens framework, used by an event, organization, service, building, or product. Next slide. So then it's over these 5 areas. So it's over products, used in manufacturing operations, in facilities, by suppliers, and contained in packaging. Again, we focused on products, and for this project, we ended up looking at facilities. Next slide. So how do we define a chemical of high concern? Again, I've referred to a benchmark 1 chemical a few times, but here's exactly more precisely what that means. It's a carcinogen, mutagen, or reproductive toxicant, or a persistent bioaccumulative toxic substance, or something of equivalently high concerns. This is where neurotoxins come in, or endocrine disruptors, or a chemical whose breakdown products result in one of those first 3 things. So it aligns with, or this is the Green Screen Benchmark 1 criteria. It also aligns with GHS criteria. Next slide. So the definition is nice, but how do you use that practically? What we've done is come up with a reference list. And so the way we get that reference list is we start with the benchmark 1 criteria there on the left, and then we run through authoritative lists. And so you see our authoritative lists, or the organizations that develop our authoritative lists there. And for those lists where you have a chemical that meets the criteria for a benchmark 1 chemical, then you get bumped out to our reference list. So the reference list ends up being about 2,200 chemicals and chemical groups that have been defined by these authoritative bodies. So we produce this reference list that you can then use to measure your chemical footprint. Next slide. So you can do a chemical footprint either by mass or by count. So by mass, you would sum the mass of all the chemicals of a high concern. If you're doing products, it would be for all the parts of a product times the number of products sold over a year, and you would get a number that's a mass. And we ask for it in kilograms. Or you could just count the number of chemicals of high concern that are intentionally added. Again, this is looking at the product scope across all of your products. Next slide. So then again, quickly, I'm just going to run through how you would do this by mass. Next slide. So you would first choose your chemical of high concern reference list. Again, we've developed a full reference list, which is the 22 chemicals and chemical groups. One subset of that list is the EU's candidate list of substances of very high concern. So some companies only track that. So to have an entry point into this, we allow people to use that list, which is somewhere north of 200 chemicals at this point. Next slide. And then you would choose a scope. which again is where this project was different. So what we have asked for in the past in the survey is for a company, manufacturer, or retailer to look at their entire product portfolio. In this case, companies either didn't have the information on their product portfolio, chemical inventories, or they weren't in the business of producing or selling products. They might just be using products. So the idea here is look for where you have data. And so in this case, it was with the facility data. All organizations, well, pre-COVID anyway, organizations had facilities, and there are products involved in maintaining those facilities. And at minimum, you've probably got SDS sheets with some information about those products. So you draw a box around your scope and then proceed from there. Next slide. So for each product within your product scope, so in this case, it would be products used in maintaining facilities, you try and get as close to a full chemical inventory as possible. So this is just an illustration of, and you're probably going to have imperfect data, but this is an illustration of what you would ideally have. Next slide. Then for all of the chemicals that you have within a given product, you would compare them to the list of chemicals of high concern and see which ones are chemicals of high concern. And then if you have mass information, sum up that mass information for the chemicals of high concern to get a chemical footprint for, in this case, one product. Next slide. And then you just repeat that over all the products that are in your product scope, and you calculate the chemical footprint for each of those products. Next slide. And then you sum up the footprints of each of those products over a 12-month period to get your organizational chemical footprint for that scope. Next slide. So this is showing how you would sum up. And obviously, it's probably not going to be in grams. This is just for illustration purposes, to get a total chemical footprint for your organization for a year. Next slide. I'd be happy to talk to anyone about this. Feel free to contact me or look for more information on the Chemical Footprint Project. Thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Tiffany now.
Hello, I'm Tiffany with TapeCon. Next slide, please. I just want to tell you a little bit about our organization. TapeCon has been in business for over 100 years. We partner with product teams to develop and scale and deliver products for printing and custom converting. Next slide. Next slide. So I mentioned that TapeCon has been in business for over 100 years, 5 generations owned. We do business around the world. Next slide. So we are a contract printing manufacturer and custom converting. So we we produce medical indicators with indicator inks. Next slide. We do printed electronics, flexible printed electronics. Next slide. We manufacture wearable tapes and patches for various medical treatments. Next slide. Other medical components, devices, we played a role in the vaccine distribution for COVID. Next slide. We also do membrane switches. Next slide. Graphic overlays. Next slide. In mold decorating for a variety of needs and products. Next slide. We also do labels and decals. Next slide. And we also do custom cohesive taping for a variety of industries. Next slide. So our role in when we participated in the chemical footprint project, we obviously, because we have a large variety of products that we manufacture here, and oftentimes our chemicals that are required to be used in our processes are dictated by our customers. So one of the first things to make note of is that we do have a large variety of various chemicals, inks, and solvents. So when we decided to, after we got the results of our survey, we identified 12 cleaning products is what we started with, and there were 7 chemicals of high concern in the cleaning products, in 4 of the products. Next slide, I think. We decided to focus our our survey on just the cleaning products that we use on our presses. So that's where we came up with the 12 products to focus on, because quite often, since our customers are dictating what chemicals we are going to be using in their products, to us, we didn't really have much choice, but we were able to make an impact in this way. And from here, we can further down the line take another step to reduce any other chemicals of high concern that we come across. So it's been a pleasure to participate in it. Thank you. I'll hand it off to Robert.
Well, thank you. I am Robert Johnson. I am a partner and the head maltster at Niagara Malt. We are located in Lockport, New York, Western New York. We are a small craft malt house providing malts for usually farm brewers. Brewers in New York having the farm brewer's license, where they have to use a certain proportion of their ingredients from New York. So we supply local brewers and a growing number of distillers, interestingly enough, who also use malt in their process. Malt is actually barley or other grains. It could be wheat or rye that has to be hydrated. So you're using water to soak 1-ton lots of raw grain, and you're stimulating that grain to sprout. And as it's sprouting, of course, you have to maintain humidity within the malt vessel, which is a large stainless steel cylinder that is watertight, airtight. And we need to perfuse the grain as it germinates with air, because these grains are sprouting and they're living things. And so they need oxygen to continue their growing process. And right at the peak of their growth, before they sprout a green stem, if you will, you have to kill the embryo, but keep the enzymes alive. So it's kind of a delicate procedure. So you're having to dry down that wet grain, which, 1 ton of grain becomes 2 tons when it's hydrated with water. And now you have to dry that down and then kiln it to develop a roasted flavor and make it suitable for the brewing process. So the dried malt, the kiln malt, is used in brewing and distilling, but also can be floured for baking and turned into a syrup, a concentrate for flavoring. If you've ever been to South Buffalo on Wednesday when they're baking the Cheerios, it really perfuses that whole area with this delightful smell. That much of that smell is actually the malt that is baked into the Cheerios. So that's what my malt house smells like most of the time, particularly when I'm curing. Now, unfortunately, this process, because you're using treated water, I should say, I use municipal water, but in the wintertime, it has to be heated. So unfortunately, I use an on-demand water heater to kind of get the temperature to 60 degrees. So I'm using a fair amount of water, and then I'm able to take the water after its use, either sending it through a kind of a custom-made septic system and a leach field that kind of filters it through sand, and it stays in the soil. So I can, I'm not dumping it into a wastewater treatment stream. And then the process of maintaining temperature and then curing is a very energy intensive procedure. Next slide, please. So a very energy intensive process. When I first started malting, if you look at this slide, you'll see a rectangular box kind of at the middle right-hand side. That box has 8 electric elements. And when I first started, my electric bill kind of kicked up to $650 a month, actually. Element heaters are the most inefficient. They get the temperature high, but they're very inefficient. So what I wound up doing is augmenting that system with a device you see on the left, which is a wood pellet boiler. I'm able to boil or burn wood pellets, which are considered a renewable resource. It's short cycle carbon. It's not fossil fuel, fortunately. And I heat a 500-gallon reservoir and I pipe that water over to the intake so I can do most of my heating using the hot water from the boiler, and then only use the element heating, the less efficient heating, to fine tune. So when I'm curing the grain, I can get the higher temperatures for the various flavors. So it's an energy intensive process. I've been able to kind of cut back on using very high levels of electricity. And I've augmented my use with solar, roof solar, that I'll talk about in just a little bit. But as you can see, there's a number of conduits and that large tank. And of course, as a food processor, as a maltster, I have to contact what would otherwise be going in people's beer and spirits down the road. So I'm inspected by the Department of Ag and Markets for cleanliness, and that meant a lot of cleaning materials. Well, I decided to last year get certified as USDA organic, and kind of in concert with that, joined the Sustainable Business Roundtable and joined in the Chemical Production Leaders Program, CPL, and that the resources from the Chemical Footprint Project kind of gave me some background in order to kind of limit what might be the most dangerous type of cleaning agents, because I go through a fair amount of cleaning agents every week to clean and sanitize my system. That gave me some alternatives to some of the more potent things. It also helped in my organic certification, because some of the chemicals that are so common actually have a lot of residual action. And in producing organic or getting certified organic, that really is prohibited. So I had to get rid of the use of quaternary ammonium products that have a long surface life and use things that are more environmentally friendly, more health friendly. And the resources from the Chemical Footprint Project helped guide me into some areas that are chemicals, cleaning agents, I should say, that were very approved by the organic regulators. We do have, being a grain processing facility, we're always being attacked by mice. So mice are verboten. Ag and Markets frowns upon any kind of evidence of mice infection or insects. So we have a system of pest control. We've gotten away from the use of poison baits and are now using pheromone traps, which have a scent that is attractive to different insects and that lures them into kind of a drop trap where they can be disposed of. And also for the mice, I use mechanical traps. I'm always looking for that better mouse trap, but I've been able to very fortunately keep myself mouse free. Next slide, please. So the organic certification and the Clean Production Leaders program really helped me focus, not just eliminating chemicals that might be more hazardous. Fortunately, I don't use anything of the highest chemical impact, but it has helped me focus my business's culture and of course its practice. So it's been very useful, and the resources have been useful trying to focus and build a culture where I'm not just physically trying to eliminate things, but also look down and look into the future. And in my interactions with the people who supply me with grain, how they are farming their land, because it's really interesting when you think of how we get influenced by chemicals, and how we come into contact with them. We don't always have a clear picture, particularly in agriculture. And it's really kind of surprising to me as I've investigated just how many chemicals go into growing 1 ton of grain. I've been able to minimize that by using organic growers. So I typically purchase my grains from organic growers who themselves have to, follow fairly strict procedures and limiting synthetic pesticides and fertilizer application. So I use organic growers, which I think is really helping me minimize my footprint, both immediately and what enters my production stream. Some of the things that I've, since being organic and since actually talking to some of my growers, because the information I pick up from the resources from the chemical footprint program, I'm able to go and talk to growers and kind of set what I think are good standards for organic grain. And, it's a bit of a back and forth. Farmers are sometimes reticent to jump into new production schemes, but when they know that there's a market for a product that is grown a certain way, it at least gives them some economic incentive. So just using organic grains, I think it is my estimate, we've reduced synthetic fertilizer applications by about 1,200 pounds, and that's an underestimate. I think we're closer to 2,000 at this point. Chemical pesticides are not allowed, so that saves about 225 gallons, considering an 80-acre application, which is about the amount of grain I would use per year. In my process, I've been able to reduce water by about 6,000 gallons now. I've replaced toxic cleaning solutions, particularly that quaternary ammonium, with plant-based and peroxide or acetic acid-based sanitizers, which are organic approved. So they have low toxicity. As I mentioned earlier, mechanical traps, pheromone traps, replacing poison baits. And I'm able to reutilize some of my polywoven bags, particularly the large super totes that grain comes in. I will clean them using plant-based materials and save those from the land. I probably saved about 2,000 pounds of various textile bags from going into a landfill. Also, one of the nice things, when you finally get your malt all nicely kilned, those rootlets are still on the seed. So they have to be cleaned off. I have an abrasive cleaner and a shaker table with screens to kind of remove the powdery residue from the pulverized roots. And that I actually collect and give to a hog farmer down the road who feeds it, mixes it in with the grain for his hogs and chickens. And I'm told they love it so much they fight over it. So instead of going to a landfill, the malt nibs, as I call them, wind up fattening some hogs. Next slide, please. Well, lastly, in order to try to minimize the footprint and my impact on electricity usage, I was on what is known as demand rate by National Grid, which is their way of kind of absorbing the cost for businesses like mine, that when those element heaters kicked in, I would pull 40 to 50,000 watts instantly. And that's really hard on the electric grid, that high demand. So the pellet boiler uses utilizing renewable sawdust. Actually, it's a waste product pressed into pellets that I then burn in a gasification boiler that is actually gives less effluent than natural gas, I am told. When it's running at optimal temperatures, it's extremely efficient. I've added on a 15 kilowatt solar roof system. So far, my annual generation is about 1,800 megawatt hours a year, which is in excess of what I use currently. My usage is about 14 megawatt hours, leaving excess generation per year in a sunny year. I don't know what it's going to be like this year, but last year I had about 4,200 kilowatts in excess, so 4.2 megawatts in excess that is shaved off of my bill. Just to put it into context, when I first started all electric, my electric bill was $650 a month. Adding the pellet boiler and solar, my electric bill is $22 a month. So a huge drop. And I'm not stressing the grid by instantaneous use, so I think it helps everybody. I heat my water with propane, and I had a barn heater, if you will, that was run on propane. I've been able to greatly reduce that by adding a heat pump. So I recently installed a heat pump, both to keep the malt house cooler in the summer and keep it comfortable. I won't say comfortable. I'm bundled up. I'm in the malt house now, and I try to keep it at about 59 degrees because keeping it cool is actually good for the malt. Happy to say it's now a carbon negative production. So not only is it organic, our malt is carbon negative, and that's been good for the bottom line because it's a marketing angle. And I think that is my story, and I'll stick by it.
Thank you so much, Bob. It's really an amazing achievement what you guys have been doing out there, and thank you so much for being a participating business. Yes, as Bob said, I'm just going to run over some brief project results that we've been able to accomplish. So 2 participating businesses successfully completed a New York State P2I report, and also 2 participating businesses completed the CFP survey from Sherry and Clean Production Action. All of our businesses now have chemical inventories and policies in place. TapeCon and Niagara Malt now have a reduced chemical footprint, and TapeCon has also identified chemicals for future reduction efforts. Also, through our educational events that the Western New York Sustainable Business puts on all throughout the year, businesses all over Western New York now have an increased awareness of chemical footprinting. So what that means and how to implement that within your own business. And as an added benefit, participating businesses have increased their workers' health and safety due to the reduction of potentially harmful chemicals. And 3 case studies were produced, which we're very excited about. So we're going to move into a brief Q&A discussion. So we're going to hear a little bit more from our presenters and our businesses. And so we'll kick things off with so our first question would be, so what were some different tactics or approaches that you guys were used to reduce your chemical footprint? So maybe when you first started this project, were there any different approaches that you weren't expecting? Anyone can jump in as well.
You know, one thing that kind of struck me as I was doing the research, the quaternary ammonium cleaning agents, they're pretty much everywhere. Benzalkonium chloride, for instance, and it's in so many different soaps and even shampoos, anything you want antibacterial or antiviral. But it is a cationic substance and has the ability to kind of stick and stay, which gives a lot of residual type of anabiosis. But you know, when trying to do something and seek organic certification, that's kind of a no-no. So it's one of the things that really got me to doing the chemical footprinting is you see a product. Everything now, I'm always flipping it over, looking at the label. I want to know what every single darn ingredient is in there, and I'll research what they all are. So as I mentioned earlier, it can be a cultural thing where when your awareness has been heightened, sometimes ignorance is bliss. You know, you just go about every day, not worry about it. But once you start seeing the ingredients and realizing a lot of these residual things just kind of, you know, constantly bombarding us. Mm-hmm. I keep my eyes open now. So.
Oh, that's great. I want anything from you, Tiffany, at TapeCon?
But yeah, I think, you know, for us here at TapeCon, because we do have such a large inventory of chemicals, it was really nice to just, you know, it could have been very overwhelming to look at like all of them, but we broke it down into, you know, starting with our press cleaning chemicals that we use there, and then from there, our next step, we can look at, you know, our facility chemicals or our maintenance chemicals. I can break it down into departments and just take steps that way, and you know, slowly reduce our, you know, chemicals of high concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, both, Sherry, do you have anything to add to that, or?
I was going to say, some of the companies that we've worked with when looking at their facility chemicals, we'll use EPA Safer Choice for third-party certified safer chemicals. So that program has been very important for these facilities, whether they're retailers or whoever, that are looking to get out of the hazardous chemicals and go to something that they know, and they don't have to. Not everybody has Robert's expertise, and not everybody knows, you know, can research all the chemicals. But EPA Safer Choice has been a very good tool for them to use for that.
Kind of leads into my next question of, you know, could you briefly touch on the different approaches you use to identify chemicals within, like, harmful chemicals you wanted to include in your inventory or reduction efforts? How did you kind of begin that process, or what tools provided through this program were of good use?
Well, so for one of our chemicals of high concern, we haven't really been able to identify a good replacement for that. But one of the things that we have looked into and are working on currently is what kind of rags are they using? Because some of the rags would, the operators are telling me it would evaporate really quickly, which meant that they were using more chemicals. So we found we're trialing different cleaning steps, different cleaning processes to reduce the use of it if we can't replace it. So you have to really kind of think outside the box. It's not just like take this chemical and get rid of it. You can't always do that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Who would have thought to identify the rag as a potential problem? It's not only the chemical.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Anything from you, Bob, about different
Yeah.
approaches or anything that were useful?
Well, the EPA Safer Choice is a very helpful resource, and oftentimes you have a particular job you want to do, and you don't necessarily just want to rely on vendor claims. So you want to know what's truly safe but what truly works. Sometimes it's trial and error, but if you find something that you see the ingredients and it is listed as a safer choice, move with it. And sometimes adapting your cleaning techniques can really make it an efficient process. So there is some trial and error, but I think knowing the right chemicals to go to is a big step. And that's where the safer choice resource is very useful.
Just throwing in a few other resources for some of the formulators that have participated. EPA skill list, which is essentially a list of green chemicals, has been very helpful for them. One resource that's actually based in Europe, TCO Development, they are a third-party certifier of electronics. And they have, for plasticizers and flame retardants, to be TCO certified, you have to use a green screen benchmark 2 or higher plasticizer or flame retardant. And so what that has done is companies, basically electronics companies, have funded the research to get plasticizers and flame retardant certified. So you can go to TCO Development and see this list of things that are being used, because otherwise the companies wouldn't have done it or wouldn't have gone through the process, and are safer. So that's one other resource for safer chemicals.
Wonderful. And a couple questions for you, Sherry, for our listeners here today. If they're interested in engaging with Clean Production Action, when and if do businesses need to disclose participation in the survey?
By default, everything is kept confidential, including their participation in the survey. That said, we encourage people or businesses to disclose their participation for a number of reasons. It encourages other businesses in their sectors in particular to be doing the same thing, because we really want this. The tool is something that helps individual businesses, but we really have a larger vision for it, which is to reduce overall the use of hazardous chemicals. And peer pressure is one of those things that we found is effective. So we encourage them to disclose their participation, and then you actually get points in the survey if you disclose your score or your responses. You can go on our website and see, if you disclose your responses, what exactly does that look like? We call those companies our disclosure leaders. And so look under the responses tab and you can see what that looks like. But again, by default, all confidential, because we want people to come in, even if they're completely new to this, and feel comfortable using the tool to begin building their chemicals management system.
Wonderful. And is there any cost for participation?
There's not.
I love that. Okay, and one last question, just to kind of wrap things up. If all three of you were to say, you know, what was your biggest takeaway? What was your biggest, you know, lesson learned from being a participant in this Clean Production Leaders program? What would you say?
There's critical mass. I think that's really important. There's what, you know, oftentimes when you decide to kind of move in one direction, you think, well, I'm going to have to reinvent the wheel, you know. Actually, when you and then you start tapping into some of these resources, you realize, well, heck, the wheel has been invented, and even it's now a belted radial, you know. It rides pretty smooth. And so there's a lot of people that have done this and have put a lot of effort into thinking through doing the research, of course, scientifically, what is toxic, levels of toxicity, toxic impacts, and then what are reasonable and effective alternatives. I think the big thing is making sure people know the resources out there, and that businesses can move in this and not really lose efficiency, not take an economic hit in doing something new and innovative, but in fact, much of the groundwork has been done. The big thing is to get people to tap into those resources so they can apply it to their production scheme.
That's a very good point.
I would second that, you know, so after going through it, I can basically take from here, I can replicate and go into different departments and kind of go through the same process for each area.
That's a really good takeaway.
I guess I'm something along the lines of the same lines, which is like the power of systems thinking. We developed this with, we hoped ultimately, you know, there's 5 areas: products, packaging, manufacturing, chemicals, supply chains, and facilities. And we really focused initially on products, but then you take that same concept, you still really need the management commitment, like that's essential, and you need a chemicals policy. But then you can take the concepts that we had developed for products and then apply them to, with tweaks. But it's actually the same questions. It's the same questions, but they're different, like, response options. There was just some nuances there. And so it was great to see organizations begin with the information that they have, and then build from that.
Always have to start somewhere, right? And it's nice that it's not always as overwhelming as it seems. Well, thank you everyone for your participation. I'm just going to share a little bit, last few slides about where our listeners can find further information. So as I mentioned in our project results, we have created a fact sheet and 3 case studies from our participating businesses that you heard from today. So the case study, the fact sheet kind of breaks down all of our businesses, how we achieved what we achieved, and lessons learned from our projects. So where you'll find that, they'll all be posted to our project website, which is www.nysustainablebusiness.org/WNY Clean Production Leaders. So all information about this project can be found on that website, and all of this will be available for you to download from there. Lastly, just a big thank you to everyone who participated, project partners, participating businesses. This was a really interesting project and with some really great results. So if anyone ever has any questions about the program, feel free to reach out to me. My email is right there. But just overall, thank you very much for everyone and all the work you did here in Western New York. So anyone have any last minute thoughts or sentiments?
It's been a great experience. Thanks so much to SBR for initiating this and hosting it. It's been great to be part of a community doing this, a geographically based community.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all. And yeah, we'll have a good rest of your day.
Okay, good job all.
Bye.